My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm about to tell you how a 32-year-old CEO learned the most expensive lesson of his corporate life when he decided I was too old to understand modern business. This is a story about respect, experience, and what happens when someone mistakes institutional knowledge for obsolescence. What Tyler Morrison didn't know was that I wasn't just another employee he could discard. I was the foundation his entire company was built on, and when you remove a foundation, everything collapses. Before I tell you about Tyler's spectacular miscalculation, let me give you some context about how I ended up in this position. 20 years ago, I was a 35-year-old compliance specialist with a master's degree in business administration and a head full of ambition. Richard Morrison, Tyler's father, was running a struggling industrial supply company out of a cramped office above Tony's Pizza on Industrial Boulevard. The company had potential, but Richard was drowning in regulatory requirements and federal compliance issues that he didn't understand. That's where I came in. Richard needed someone who could navigate the labyrinthine world of government contracting, someone who understood OSHA regulations, EPA requirements, and the dozens of other federal agencies that governed his business. I had spent 5 years working for a regulatory consulting firm, and I knew exactly how to turn his struggling operation into a compliant, profitable enterprise. We struck a deal. I would come on board as a founding partner, taking a 15% equity stake in exchange for my expertise and a significantly reduced salary. Richard would maintain majority control, but I would have the authority to make all compliance and operational decisions. It was a handshake deal sealed with partnership papers that Richard filed away in a blue folder and apparently never thought about again. Over the next 5 years, I transformed Morrison Industries. I obtained their first federal contracts, established relationships with approved vendors, and built the compliance infrastructure that would allow the company to grow from a two-person operation to a 50-employee enterprise. When Richard had his heart attack in 2018, the company was generating $15 million in annual revenue and had been profitable for 8 consecutive years. Tyler inherited a successful business, but he also inherited something he didn't understand: a partner who had been instrumental in building everything he now took for granted. The first 18 months of Tyler's tenure as CEO had been relatively smooth. He made some changes I disagreed with, hiring expensive consultants to tell us things we already knew, implementing new software systems that didn't integrate with our existing processes, and bringing in his college friends for strategic advisory roles, but nothing that fundamentally threatened the business. The turning point came when Morrison Industries was approached by Hartwell Defense Contractors for a major supply agreement. Hartwell was offering a 3-year contract worth $8 million annually, but they required a supplier who could meet enhanced security clearances and accelerated delivery schedules. It was exactly the kind of contract that could take our company to the next level. I spent 6 weeks preparing our bid, working with our vendors to ensure we could meet Hartwell's requirements and coordinating with federal agencies to update our security clearances. The proposal I submitted was 150 pages of detailed specifications, delivery schedules, quality assurance protocols, and compliance certifications. Tyler submitted a 12-page PowerPoint presentation that he'd had his consulting firm prepare. It focused on innovative supply chain solutions and disruptive procurement methodologies, but completely ignored Hartwell's actual requirements. When Hartwell awarded us the contract based on my proposal, Tyler took full credit during the company-wide announcement. He stood in front of our entire staff and explained how his strategic vision and forward-thinking approach had won us the largest contract in company history. I said nothing, but I started paying closer attention to Tyler's decision-making process. Over the next few months, I watched him take credit for my work repeatedly while simultaneously undermining my authority with small comments about updating our approaches and bringing fresh thinking to operational challenges. The final straw came during our quarterly board meeting in October. Morrison Industries had a board of directors consisting of Tyler, his mother Patricia, and 2 outside investors who had provided expansion capital in 2015. As operations manager, I typically presented the quarterly compliance report and discussed any regulatory issues that might affect our contracts. This time, Tyler interrupted my presentation after 5 minutes. "Thanks, Margaret. That's sufficient detail," he said, motioning for me to sit down. "I think everyone understands that compliance is important, but we don't need to get bogged down in bureaucratic minutiae." Then he launched into a 20-minute presentation about his digital transformation roadmap and how Morrison Industries needed to embrace technological disruption to remain competitive. He talked about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and blockchain technology as if they were magic solutions to problems we didn't have. During the Q&A session, one of the outside investors asked about our vendor relationship management system. Margaret can probably give you the details, Tyler said dismissively, but we're looking at completely overhauling our vendor relationships to leverage B2B marketplace platforms and optimize price discovery through competitive bidding processes. I cleared my throat. Actually, our vendor relationships are one of our strongest competitive advantages. We have exclusive agreements with 3 suppliers who provide specialized materials that our competitors can't access. Moving to marketplace platforms would compromise both our quality standards and our security clearances. That's the old way of thinking, Tyler replied with a condescending smile. Modern businesses don't rely on personal relationships. They rely on data-driven decision-making and algorithmic optimization. Patricia Morrison, Tyler's mother, leaned forward. Margaret, what's your assessment of these proposed changes? I looked directly at Tyler as I answered. With respect, Mrs. Morrison, implementing Tyler's suggestions would jeopardize our federal contracts and potentially cost us the Hartwell relationship. Our vendor agreements include security clearances and quality certifications that took years to establish. You can't replicate that through marketplace platforms. Tyler's face flushed red. After the meeting, he followed me to my office. Margaret, I need you to understand something. I'm the CEO of this company, and when I present a strategic vision, I need my senior staff to support it, not undermine it. I wasn't undermining you, Tyler. I was providing accurate information about the regulatory constraints we operate under. That's exactly the problem, he said, sitting down in the chair across from my desk. You think in terms of constraints and limitations. I think in terms of possibilities and opportunities. This company needs someone who can think beyond the status quo. This company needs someone who understands the business we're actually in, I replied. We're not a tech startup, Tyler. We're a regulated industrial supplier with federal contracts that require specific compliance standards. You can't disrupt your way out of EPA regulations. Tyler was quiet for a moment, scrolling through his phone. Then he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not just frustration, but genuine dislike. Margaret, I'm going to be frank with you. You've been with this company for a long time, and I appreciate everything you've contributed, but I'm starting to think you might not be the right fit for where we're headed. What exactly does that mean? It means maybe it's time for you to think about retirement, enjoy your golden years, spend time with family, let younger people take Morrison Industries into the future. That conversation took place on November 8th. 2 weeks later, Tyler walked into my office to fire me. It started on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other. I was in my office at 6:30 a.m., same as I'd been for the past 20 years, reviewing the quarterly compliance reports, when Tyler Morrison walked in. Not knocked, walked in. This kid, and at 32 he was definitely a kid to me, had inherited his father's company 18 months ago and had been making improvements ever since. Margaret, we need to talk, he said, not bothering to sit down. He was wearing one of those expensive, slim-cut suits that cost more than most people make in a month, holding his phone like it might deliver a divine revelation at any moment. I looked up from my spreadsheets. Good morning, Tyler. What can I do for you? I'll cut to the chase. We're restructuring operations to focus on digital transformation and agile methodologies. The board and I have decided that we need fresh blood in senior positions, people who understand the modern marketplace. I'd heard this speech before. Different words, same message. I see. And what exactly does that mean for my department? Tyler shifted his weight, suddenly looking less confident. Look, Margaret, you've been great, really. But we need someone who can leverage synergies with our tech stack and drive innovation through disruptive thinking. I almost laughed. This was the same kid who'd called me 3 weeks ago because he couldn't figure out why his computer wouldn't turn on. It was unplugged. Are you firing me, Tyler? We're calling it early retirement. Very generous package, of course. 6 months severance, full benefits continuation. You should be grateful. Honestly. Most people your age would kill for a deal like this. My age, 55 years old, and apparently that made me ancient in Tyler's world. I'd started at Morrison Industries when his father was still building the business from a 2-room office above a pizza shop. I'd been there through the expansion, the near bankruptcy in 2008, the federal contract wins that saved the company. But sure, I was the problem. And who's replacing me? Tyler's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Actually, my nephew Brandon just finished his MBA at Stanford. Brilliant kid. Really understands how to optimize operational efficiency through digital ecosystem integration. Brandon Morrison. I knew him, unfortunately. 26 years old, had worked exactly one summer internship at his uncle's company before graduate school, and thought business was just like the case studies in his textbooks. I'd met him at the company Christmas party, where he'd spent 30 minutes explaining to me how blockchain technology could revolutionize our procurement process. We sold industrial cleaning supplies. When would this transition take place? I asked, keeping my voice steady. End of the week would be ideal. Brandon's eager to hit the ground running. I nodded slowly, my mind already working. 20 years of institutional knowledge, and they wanted me gone by Friday so a kid with an MBA could play with digital transformation. I'll need some time to organize my files and transition my responsibilities. Actually, Tyler said, pulling out his phone again, we'd prefer if you just focused on wrapping up your current projects. Brandon will be developing his own systems and processes. We don't want to burden him with outdated methodologies. That's when I knew this wasn't just about age discrimination. This was about erasing everything I'd built and letting this kid take credit for 2 decades of work. They thought they could just delete me and start fresh. Of course, I said, I'll start organizing things today. Tyler smiled, probably thinking this had gone easier than expected. Great, HR will have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. And Margaret, this really is for the best. You'll have more time to enjoy your golden years. After he left, I sat in my office for exactly 10 minutes, not moving, just thinking. Then I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a blue folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents that Tyler had probably never seen, papers that his father had filed when the company was incorporated back in 1998. See, what Tyler didn't understand was that his father and I had a different kind of business relationship. When Richard Morrison started this company, he needed capital. But more importantly, he needed someone who understood the labyrinthine world of federal contracting. Someone who could navigate the regulatory requirements and compliance standards that would make or break his business. That someone was me. I wasn't just an employee when Morrison Industries was founded. I was a founding partner, holding 15% equity in the company. Over the years, as the company grew and Richard brought in investors, my paperwork had gotten buried under layers of corporate restructuring and new shareholder agreements. But the original partnership agreement had never been formally dissolved. According to the 1998 Incorporation documents, I was still a managing partner. Richard had meant to buy out my stake when the company went profitable, but he died of a heart attack before we could complete the paperwork. Tyler had inherited the CEO position and majority ownership, but he'd never bothered to check the original incorporation documents. Legally, I owned 15% of Morrison Industries, and as a managing partner, I had certain rights that Tyler was about to learn about the hard way. But the equity was just the beginning. Over the next 2 hours, I pulled out file after file, each one representing a different pressure point in Tyler's carefully constructed corporate empire. First, there was the insurance situation. When the company had expanded rapidly in 2015, they'd needed someone with a clean professional record to serve as the authorized agent for their business insurance policies. Since I'd been handling compliance and regulatory affairs for years, Richard had put my name on everything. Workers' compensation, general liability, professional indemnity, property insurance, all of it listed me as the primary authorized agent. The insurance situation was more complex than Tyler could possibly understand. When Morrison Industries had secured their first major federal contract in 2010, the government required proof of comprehensive coverage that exceeded standard commercial policies. Richard and I had spent months working with insurance brokers to create a custom package that met federal requirements while remaining affordable for our growing business. The policies we eventually secured were not standard commercial insurance. They were specialized government contractor policies that required the insurer to work directly with our authorized agent, me, for any changes, claims, or modifications. The insurance company had insisted on this arrangement because government contractor policies involve complex compliance requirements that change frequently. What this meant in practical terms was that every 6 months, I had to certify to our insurance carrier that Morrison Industries was maintaining compliance with all applicable federal regulations. If I failed to provide this certification, or if I was no longer available to provide it, the policies would automatically terminate after 30 days. Tyler had no idea that our insurance was structured this way. He thought insurance was just another business expense that could be managed like any other vendor relationship. He didn't understand that our policies were legally integrated into my role as compliance officer, and that removing me would trigger automatic cancellation clauses. But insurance was just one part of the web of legal and financial obligations that connected my position to the company's operational infrastructure. Then there was the banking situation. As operations manager, I'd been added as a secondary signer on the main corporate operating account. It was a practical necessity. There were times when Richard was traveling and needed someone who could authorize large payments to vendors or handle payroll issues. When Tyler took over, no one had bothered to remove my banking authorization. The banking relationship was even more complicated than it appeared on the surface. Morrison Industries maintained accounts with three different banks: a primary operating account for day-to-day transactions, a federal contract escrow account for government payments, and a line of credit for managing cash flow during large contract fulfillment periods. I was listed as an authorized signer on all three accounts, but my role was more than just administrative convenience. The federal contract escrow account required two signatures for any withdrawals over $50,000, and the bank had specifically designated me as one of the required signers because of my security clearance and compliance background. The line of credit was secured against our federal contracts, and the bank required quarterly compliance certifications from an authorized signatory before renewing the credit line. I had been providing these certifications for the past 8 years, and the bank considered me an essential component of their risk management process. If I was removed from these accounts without proper notification and transition procedures, the bank would freeze all three accounts pending a review of the company's management structure and compliance status. This wasn't a theoretical possibility, it was explicitly stated in our banking agreements. But the real nuclear option was the vendor contracts. Morrison Industries had three major suppliers who provided the bulk of our raw materials. These weren't just business relationships, they were personal relationships. I'd cultivated over 15 years. And more importantly, each of these contracts contained what's called a key personnel clause. Let me explain exactly what these vendor relationships meant and why they were so critical to Morrison Industries' operations. Our primary supplier was Precision Chemical Corporation, a specialized manufacturer that produced industrial solvents and cleaning compounds for defense contractors and government agencies. Precision Chemical had been working with Morrison Industries since 2006, when I had personally negotiated our first supply agreement with their Vice President of Government Sales, David Chen. No relation, despite the shared surname. The relationship with Precision Chemical went far beyond a standard vendor arrangement. Because we were buying specialized chemicals for government contracts, every batch had to meet strict purity standards and come with detailed certificates of analysis. Precision Chemical had invested significant resources in understanding our specific requirements, training their quality control staff to our standards, and maintaining the security clearances necessary to work with defense contractors. Our contract with Precision Chemical included a key personnel clause that specifically named me as the primary relationship manager. This clause stated that if I left Morrison Industries, Precision Chemical had the right to renegotiate the terms of our supply agreement or terminate the contract entirely with 60 days' notice. The clause existed because Precision Chemical's management considered me a crucial part of the relationship. I understood their production capabilities, I knew their quality systems, and I had the technical background to specify exactly what we needed for different contracts. Precision Chemical represented about $1.2 million in annual purchasing for Morrison Industries, but more importantly, they were our exclusive supplier for three specific chemical compounds that were essential for fulfilling our government contracts. If Precision Chemical terminated our agreement, we would have to find new suppliers who could meet government security requirements and quality standards, a process that could take 6 to 12 months. Our second major supplier was Industrial Solutions Group, a company that provided specialized packaging and shipping materials for hazardous chemicals. This relationship was equally important and equally dependent on my personal involvement. Industrial Solutions Group had developed custom packaging solutions specifically for Morrison Industries products. When we shipped chemicals to government facilities, everything had to meet Department of Transportation regulations for hazardous materials, Department of Defense security requirements, and specific environmental standards for each destination facility. I had worked with Industrial Solutions Group's engineering team to develop packaging systems that met all these requirements while remaining cost-effective for our business. The process had taken 2 years and required extensive testing and certification. Our contract with Industrial Solutions Group included intellectual property provisions that gave Morrison Industries exclusive access to these custom packaging solutions, but only as long as I remained involved as the technical liaison. The key personnel clause in our Industrial Solutions Group contract was even more restrictive than our Precision Chemical agreement. If I left Morrison Industries, Industrial Solutions Group had the right to immediately suspend shipments until a replacement technical liaison could be trained and certified, a process that their contract specified would take a minimum of 6 months. Industrial Solutions Group represented about $800,000 in annual business, but losing access to their custom packaging systems would effectively shut down our ability to ship products to government customers. Our third major supplier was Specialized Materials Corporation, which provided rare earth compounds and specialized additives that we incorporated into custom chemical formulations for specific government contracts. This was the most complex and sensitive of our vendor relationships. Specialized Materials Corporation dealt exclusively with defense contractors and government agencies. Their products were subject to international traffic in arms regulations, ITAR, and required special export licenses for any international shipments. I held the security clearances and technical certifications necessary to specify, purchase, and handle these materials on behalf of Morrison Industries. The relationship with Specialized Materials Corporation wasn't just protected by a key personnel clause, it was legally dependent on my personal involvement. ITAR regulations required that any company handling controlled materials designate a specific individual as the authorized technical representative. I was Morrison Industries' designated technical representative for all ITAR controlled materials, and transferring this designation to another person required federal approval and extensive background investigations. Specialized Materials Corporation represented about $600,000 in annual purchasing, but their materials were essential for our two largest government contracts, which generated about $4 million in annual revenue. Tyler didn't know any of this because he'd never bothered to read the vendor contracts or understand the regulatory requirements that governed our business. He thought vendors were just companies you bought things from, and that relationships could be easily transferred from one person to another. Finally, there was the regulatory compliance issue. Morrison Industries held several federal contracts that required specific certifications and clearances. I held 3 of those certifications personally, and they couldn't be transferred to another employee without a lengthy approval process that typically took 60 to 90 days. The regulatory situation was the most complex aspect of Morrison Industries' operations, and it was the area where Tyler's ignorance could cause the most damage. Morrison Industries held contracts with 3 different government agencies: the Department of Defense, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the General Services Administration. Each agency had different requirements for contractor qualifications, and each contract required ongoing compliance monitoring and reporting. I held personal certifications as a qualified environmental professional, QEP, from the Institute of Professional Environmental Practice, a certified hazardous materials manager, CHMM, from the Institute of Hazardous Materials Management, and a defense contract security officer certification from the Defense Security Service. These weren't just professional credentials that looked good on a resume. They were legal requirements for anyone who managed contracts with these agencies. The Department of Defense required that all contractors working with hazardous materials have a designated CHMM on staff. The EPA required that all environmental remediation contractors have a QEP managing their projects. The GSA required that all contractors handling sensitive materials have a certified security officer overseeing their operations. If I left Morrison Industries, the company would have 60 days to replace me with someone who held equivalent certifications. If they couldn't find a replacement within 60 days, their contracts would be suspended until they could demonstrate compliance with personnel requirements. Getting these certifications wasn't something that could be done quickly. The CHMM certification required a minimum of 5 years of relevant experience plus passing a comprehensive examination. The QEP certification required a master's degree in environmental science plus 3 years of professional experience. The security officer certification required federal background investigations that could take months to complete. But here's the thing that Tyler really didn't understand. These certifications weren't just professional qualifications. They were personal legal responsibilities. As the certified professional on these contracts, I was personally liable for ensuring that Morrison Industries maintained compliance with all applicable regulations. If the company violated environmental regulations or security protocols, I could be personally fined or even criminally prosecuted. This personal liability was one of the reasons why Richard had originally made me a partner rather than just an employee. The legal exposure that came with these certifications was significant, and Richard had wanted to ensure that I had an ownership stake in the company that reflected the personal risks I was taking. Tyler had never considered any of this because he didn't understand the regulatory environment we operated in. He thought compliance was just paperwork that could be handled by anyone with a college degree. So Tyler wanted me gone by Friday, thinking he could just plug his nephew into my position and everything would continue seamlessly. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't just an employee. I was a critical infrastructure component, and removing me would cause systematic failures throughout his entire operation. But I wasn't going to play my cards all at once. I wanted Tyler to dig himself deeper first. I spent the rest of Tuesday documenting everything. Every process, every relationship, every potential point of failure. Not because I was planning to help with the transition, but because I wanted to create a complete record of everything Tyler was about to lose. On Wednesday morning, Brandon Morrison showed up for his orientation. I was expecting some version of Tyler Young, arrogant, overconfident. What I got was worse. Brandon was all of those things, but he was also genuinely stupid. So Margaret, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk like he already owned it. Uncle Tyler says you're going to bring me up to speed on the operational framework here. I'll do my best, I said. What would you like to know? Well, first off, I'm thinking we need to completely overhaul the supply chain management system. From what I can see, you guys are still using these old-fashioned vendor relationships instead of leveraging B2B marketplace platforms for optimal price discovery. I blinked. Our vendors provide specialized industrial chemicals. We've been working with them for 15 years because they understand our exact specifications and quality requirements. Right, but that's the old way of thinking. Why limit ourselves to 3 suppliers when we could have access to hundreds through digital platforms? Competition drives innovation. I spent the next 20 minutes trying to explain to Brandon why we couldn't just order industrial chemicals from random suppliers on the internet. I told him about security clearances, quality certifications, ITAR regulations, and key personnel clauses. He nodded along, but I could see that none of it was registering. Okay, I get that there are some bureaucratic hurdles, he said finally, but surely there are ways to streamline these processes. Have you considered using artificial intelligence to automate compliance monitoring? Brandon, compliance monitoring isn't something you can automate. It requires human judgment and professional expertise. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to disrupt, he said, pulling out his phone to take notes. Every industry thinks their processes are too complex to automate, but that's just resistance to change. This isn't resistance to change, Brandon. This is understanding of federal law. Same thing, really, he said with a grin. My business school professors always said that regulation is just another form of market inefficiency that can be optimized through innovative thinking. I stared at him. Brandon, we work with the Department of Defense. You can't optimize your way out of ITAR compliance. What's ITAR? I spent another 10 minutes explaining international traffic in arms regulations, watching Brandon's eyes glaze over as I described export controls, security classifications, and federal licensing requirements. So basically, he said when I finished, the government makes it really complicated to buy and sell things. And instead of finding ways around these complications, the industry just accepts them as unchangeable constraints.
They're not constraints, Brandon. They're legal requirements designed to protect national security.
Right, but what if we approach national security from a different angle? What if instead of restricting trade, we use blockchain technology to create transparent, secure supply chains that automatically verify compliance? I realized I was dealing with someone who thought the entire regulatory framework governing defense contracting was just an outdated business model that could be disrupted like Uber disrupted taxis. Brandon, I said carefully, have you ever worked in a regulated industry before? Not directly, but I wrote my master's thesis on regulatory disruption in the financial services sector. The principles are transferable.
What was your thesis about?
How cryptocurrency and decentralized finance are making traditional banking regulations obsolete. I looked at this 26-year-old kid who thought he could revolutionize defense contracting with cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, and I realized that Tyler's plan was even more catastrophic than I had imagined. Let's talk about our current contracts, I said. Morrison Industries has agreements with the Department of Defense worth about $6 million annually. These contracts require that we maintain specific security clearances, quality certifications, and personnel qualifications. If we lose these contracts, we lose about 40% of our revenue. Exactly. Brandon said excitedly. That's way too much dependence on a single customer segment. We need to diversify our market exposure and develop new revenue streams that aren't subject to government bureaucracy. Brandon, those contracts are the foundation of our business. They provide stable, long-term revenue that allows us to invest in equipment, training, and growth. But they also limit our flexibility and innovation potential. What if we focused on developing commercial applications for our products? What if we created consumer-facing brands that could scale through direct-to-consumer marketing? We manufacture industrial solvents and hazardous chemicals, Brandon. We're not going to sell them at Target. Why not? Have you seen how successful brands like Method and Seventh Generation have been? Consumers are definitely interested in eco-friendly cleaning products. I spent the next hour trying to explain the difference between consumer cleaning products and industrial chemicals, but Brandon kept coming back to his conviction that every business problem could be solved through innovative marketing and customer experience optimization. When lunchtime came, I was genuinely concerned about what would happen to Morrison Industries if this kid was actually put in charge of operations. That afternoon, Tyler called me into his office. "How's the transition going?" he asked. "Brandon is very enthusiastic," I said diplomatically. "Great, I knew you two would work well together. Brandon has some really innovative ideas about modernizing our processes." "He does have a lot of ideas," I agreed. "Perfect. So you'll be able to wrap everything up by Friday?" I looked at Tyler, sitting behind his father's desk in his expensive suit, and made my decision. "Actually, Tyler, I need to discuss something with you. I've been reviewing my original employment documents, and there are some legal complications with my departure." "What kind of complications?" I pulled out the blue folder and slid it across his desk. "According to the 1998 Incorporation documents, I'm not just an employee. I'm a founding partner with a 15% equity stake in Morrison Industries." Tyler's face went through several emotions, very quickly. Confusion, disbelief, and then panic. He started flipping through the papers, his expensive education, apparently not having covered how to read partnership agreements. This can't be right. My father owned the whole company." "Your father owned 85%. I owned 15%. The paperwork was never completed to buy out my stake." But you've been getting a salary. You can't be a partner and an employee." "Actually, I can. It's called a working partner arrangement. Check Section 12 of the partnership agreement." Tyler was frantically reading now, his phone forgotten for once. "Even if this is legitimate, which I'm not saying it is, it doesn't change anything. We're still restructuring." "Actually, it changes quite a bit. As a managing partner, I have veto power over major personnel decisions. Firing me would require approval from all partners, which includes me." That wasn't entirely true, but Tyler didn't know enough corporate law to challenge it. I was buying time while I implemented the rest of my plan. "Furthermore," I continued, "there are some other issues we need to discuss. I'm listed as the authorized agent on all of our insurance policies. Terminating me without proper notice could result in coverage cancellation." Tyler looked like someone had just told him his trust fund was imaginary. "What do you mean, coverage cancellation?" 90 days notice, Tyler. That's what's required for any changes to personnel who are listed on the insurance policies. Fire me on Friday, and our insurance could be canceled by Monday.
You're bluffing?
I pulled out another folder. Workers' compensation policy, page 12. General liability, page 8. Professional indemnity, page 15. My name is on all of them as authorized agent. Tyler was starting to sweat now. Without insurance, Morrison Industries couldn't operate. Their federal contracts all required proof of insurance, and their commercial clients wouldn't work with an uninsured vendor. "And there's more," I said, enjoying myself now. "I'm the secondary signer on the main operating account. As a partner, I have the right to freeze assets if I suspect financial irregularities." "What financial irregularities?" "Well, hiring Brandon without posting the position publicly could be considered nepotism. And if you're paying him more than the position was budgeted for, that could be considered misappropriation of corporate funds." Tyler's jaw was working like he was trying to solve a very difficult math problem. You can't do this. This is extortion." "No, Tyler, this is business. You wanted to fire me because you thought I was obsolete. I'm showing you exactly how not obsolete I am." But I still wasn't done. "Oh, and there's one more thing. Our vendor contracts, Precision Chemical, Industrial Solutions Group, and Specialized Materials Corp., all three contracts have key personnel clauses that list me specifically. If I leave the company, they have the right to renegotiate or terminate their agreements. How much are those contracts worth? About 2.8 million annually. Tyler was full on panicking now. But Brandon has an MBA from Stanford. He understands modern business practices. Brandon spent 20 minutes this morning trying to convince me that we should switch to cryptocurrency payments because cash is legacy technology. I'm not sure he understands any kind of business practices. That evening, I got 3 phone calls. The first was from Tyler, asking if we could discuss this situation like reasonable adults. The second was from their company lawyer, wanting to understand the legal implications of the partnership agreement. The third was from Tyler's mother, Richard's widow, who apparently still had some influence in company decisions. I agreed to meet with all of them on Thursday morning. The conference room was crowded. Tyler, his mother Patricia, their lawyer David Kim, and Brandon, who looked confused about why he was there. I brought my own lawyer, Sarah Martinez, whom I'd retained that morning. Let's cut through the nonsense, Patricia said without preamble. She was a sharp woman in her 70s who'd been instrumental in building Morrison Industries alongside her late husband. Margaret, what do you want? I want to be treated with the respect I've earned over 20 years, I said. I want Tyler to acknowledge that I'm not some obsolete employee he can discard when it's convenient. You blindsided us with this partnership thing, Tyler said petulantly. I didn't blindside you with anything. The documentation has been in the company files since 19... If you'd done proper due diligence when you inherited the company, you would have known about it. David Kim cleared his throat. We've reviewed the partnership agreement. It appears to be legitimate and binding. Ms. Chen does have equity in the company, and there are provisions that complicate any involuntary termination. So what are our options? Patricia asked. We can buy out her partnership stake, David said, or we can negotiate a voluntary departure with appropriate transition time for all the contractual obligations. How much would a buyout cost? Tyler asked. Sarah answered, based on the company's current valuation, Ms. Chen's 15% stake would be worth approximately $4.2 million. Tyler looked like he'd been hit with a brick. Morrison Industries was profitable, but they didn't have $4.2 million in liquid capital just sitting around. Or, I said, we can discuss a different arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Patricia asked. I stay on as operations manager for another 5 years, at which point we execute the buyout based on the company's valuation at that time. Tyler can bring Brandon in as an assistant operations manager to learn the business properly, and we implement a formal succession plan that doesn't involve firing people the week before Christmas. It was November 15th. I'd just realized that Tyler had been planning to fire me right before the holidays, which somehow made the whole situation even more insulting. 5 years? Tyler protested. That's not... we need fresh thinking now. Tyler, his mother said sharply, you've just learned that Margaret owns 15% of your company. I suggest you start thinking of her as a partner, not an employee. But Brandon can learn the business properly, Patricia continued. From what I understand, he has a lot to learn. Brandon, who had been silent through most of the meeting, finally spoke up. I don't understand what's happening. Am I getting the job or not? You're getting a job, I said. Assistant operations manager, starting salary of $65,000 with the possibility of advancement based on performance and actual learning. 65? Uncle Tyler said the position paid $120. Everyone turned to look at Tyler, who was now the color of a ripe tomato. We were still negotiating the compensation package. David Kim was taking notes furiously. Promising someone a specific salary before the position was formally approved was yet another potential legal issue. So I said, do we have an agreement? Patricia looked at Tyler, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his expensive suit. We have an agreement, she said. Excellent. I'll have my lawyer draft the formal amendments to the partnership agreement. Tyler, you'll need to add me to the board of directors, since I should have been there all along as a managing partner. Board of directors? Oh, did I not mention that? Managing partners typically have board seats. It's fairly standard. Tyler looked at his mother, who shrugged. Your father and I always made major decisions together anyway. Adding Margaret to the board formalizes what should have been happening all along. And that's how Tyler Morrison learned that you can't just throw away 20 years of institutional knowledge because you want to play with new toys. Over the next few months, Brandon did actually learn quite a bit about the business, though it took him 6 months to understand why we couldn't just switch to digital marketplaces for procurement. Tyler, meanwhile, learned to include me in major decisions, mostly because he legally had to. The company continued to be profitable, the federal contracts remained secure, and our vendor relationships actually improved as I was able to negotiate better terms based on my enhanced position as a board member. But the real lesson came 6 months later, when Tyler tried to implement a digital transformation initiative without consulting me first. I simply mentioned that I'd need to review how the changes would affect our compliance requirements and vendor contracts, and Tyler quickly agreed to a more collaborative approach. The truth is, experience and institutional knowledge aren't things you can just replace with enthusiasm and an MBA. Tyler learned that lesson the expensive way, but he learned it. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone's business. It's making them realize they need you more than you need them. Brandon turned out to be a decent kid once he stopped trying to reinvent everything and started listening to people who actually knew what they were talking about. He's still with the company, and he might actually be ready for a management role in another year or two. As for me, I'm still there, still managing operations, still making sure the company runs smoothly. But now I do it as a partner, not just an employee. And when Tyler gets too excited about the latest business trends, I just smile and remind him that some things are worth preserving. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply proving that you were right all along. Tyler never did figure out how to use the coffee machine in the break room. Some things apparently require experience that can't be learned in business school, but that's a lesson for another day. The company is stronger now than it's ever been, and Tyler has actually turned into a decent CEO once he learned to value the knowledge and experience of the people around him. Sometimes the best way to teach someone respect is to show them exactly what they stand to lose. And every time I see that partnership agreement hanging in my office, I remember that knowledge is power, but knowing when and how to use that knowledge, that's wisdom. And wisdom, unlike youth and enthusiasm, only comes with experience. Some lessons are expensive, but they're worth every penny. Looking back on this experience now, several years later, I realized that the confrontation with Tyler taught me as much about leadership as it taught him about respect. When you've been in a supporting role for 2 decades, suddenly finding yourself in a position of power can be just as challenging as learning to acknowledge that power in others. The transition wasn't entirely smooth. There were moments when Tyler struggled with his ego, times when I had to resist the temptation to micromanage decisions I disagreed with, and situations where Brandon's inexperience created problems that required all of us to work together to solve. But those challenges forced us to develop a more collaborative approach to running the business. Tyler learned to bring major decisions to the board for discussion before implementation. I learned to present my concerns constructively rather than simply vetoing ideas I didn't like. And Brandon learned to ask questions before proposing solutions, which made his eventual contributions much more valuable. The success of our new partnership structure became evident during the federal contract renewal process in our 3rd year. The Department of Defense was tightening requirements for contractors, implementing new security protocols, and raising quality standards across the board. Many of our competitors struggled to meet these enhanced requirements and lost their contracts. Morrison Industries not only maintained all of our existing contracts, but secured 2 new ones, thanks to the combination of Tyler's strategic relationship building, my regulatory expertise, and Brandon's fresh perspective on process optimization. The collaborative approach we'd been forced to develop turned out to be exactly what we needed to navigate an increasingly complex regulatory environment. Tyler's growth as a leader became particularly evident during the COVID-19 pandemic. When government contracts were delayed and supply chains disrupted, he could have panicked and made desperate cost-cutting decisions. Instead, he worked with me to identify which operations were truly essential and which could be temporarily suspended without violating our contractual obligations. We developed a comprehensive business continuity plan that protected our employees while maintaining our ability to fulfill critical contracts. Brandon contributed by identifying opportunities to automate certain processes, reducing our dependence on physical presence while maintaining quality standards. The pandemic also highlighted the value of the relationships I'd built over the years. When many suppliers were struggling with capacity constraints and shipping delays, our vendors prioritized Morrison Industries because of the trust and reliability we'd established. The key personnel clauses that had seemed like leverage points during my confrontation with Tyler turned out to be genuine partnerships that benefited everyone involved. Brandon's development during this period was particularly impressive. He learned to appreciate the complexity of federal contracting and the importance of regulatory compliance. but he also brought valuable insights about technology and process improvement. His Stanford MBA proved useful once he understood how to apply business school theories to the realities of a regulated industry. By the end of his third year, Brandon was ready for real responsibilities. We promoted him to operations manager while I transitioned to chief operating officer, a new position that reflected my board level responsibilities and strategic role in the company's growth. The promotion process became a model for how succession planning should work. We developed a comprehensive transition plan that included overlapping responsibilities, formal training programs, and clear performance metrics. Brandon earned his promotion through demonstrated competence and gradual assumption of responsibilities, rather than family connections and promises. Tyler, meanwhile, focused on his strengths in strategic planning and business development. He proved to be effective at identifying growth opportunities and building relationships with potential clients, especially once he learned to work with the operational team to ensure that new opportunities were feasible within our regulatory constraints. The board structure that had been imposed by legal necessity evolved into a genuine governance system that strengthened the company's decision-making processes. We added 2 outside directors with relevant industry experience, creating a board that provided both oversight and expertise for major strategic decisions. One of the most satisfying developments was watching Tyler's relationship with our employees evolve. Initially, many of our long-term staff had been skeptical of his leadership, viewing him as someone who had inherited a position rather than earning it. But as he demonstrated respect for their expertise and showed genuine interest in their professional development, he earned their loyalty through his actions. Tyler implemented a formal mentorship program that paired experienced employees with newer hires, ensuring that institutional knowledge would be preserved and transferred. He also established regular lunch and learn sessions where different departments could share their expertise with the rest of the company, breaking down silos and improving communication. The company's financial performance during this period reflected the success of our new collaborative approach. Revenue grew by 40% over 3 years, driven by both new contract wins and improved operational efficiency. More importantly, employee retention improved dramatically, and our reputation in the industry strengthened as we became known for both reliability and innovation. Our success attracted attention from larger companies interested in acquisition, but the board unanimously decided that maintaining our independence was more valuable than a quick payout. We had built something that worked, and we weren't interested in having it absorbed into a larger corporate structure that might not appreciate our unique culture and capabilities. The partnership buyout that had originally been scheduled for 5 years was renegotiated into a longer-term arrangement that reflected the company's continued growth and my ongoing role as COO. Rather than a single large payment, we structured it as an earn-out based on company performance, aligning my financial incentives with the long-term success of the business.
Tyler's personal growth during this period was as remarkable as the company's professional development. He enrolled in an executive education program focused on leadership in regulated industries, acknowledging that his Stanford business education hadn't prepared him for the realities of federal contracting.
He also worked with an executive coach to develop his communication skills and learn how to manage conflicts constructively. The arrogant young man who had tried to fire me for being too old evolved into a thoughtful leader who valued diverse perspectives and understood that effective leadership meant empowering others to succeed. Brandon's trajectory was equally impressive. After mastering the operational aspects of the business, he pursued additional certifications in environmental management and quality assurance, eventually earning the credentials necessary to serve as a backup for my regulatory responsibilities. His Stanford MBA, combined with hands-on experience in a complex business environment, made him an invaluable asset in ways that neither his initial arrogance nor my initial skepticism had anticipated. He became living proof that academic knowledge and practical experience could be combined effectively when approached with humility and respect for existing expertise. The success story of Morrison Industries became something of a case study in the industry, demonstrating how family businesses could successfully navigate generational transitions while maintaining their core strengths. We were invited to speak at industry conferences and contributed to articles about succession planning and collaborative leadership. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from our employees and clients, who consistently rated Morrison Industries as a preferred employer and vendor. We had created a culture that valued both innovation and expertise, both growth and stability. The legal documentation that had originally been weapons in a corporate conflict became the foundation for a governance structure that served the company well. The partnership agreement, insurance policies, vendor contracts, and regulatory certifications that had given me leverage during the crisis were all updated and strengthened to support our continued growth. We also implemented comprehensive risk management procedures to ensure that the company would never again be vulnerable to the kind of systematic failures that Tyler's original plan would have created. Key personnel clauses were expanded to include multiple employees, insurance policies were restructured to provide better coverage and redundancy, and regulatory responsibilities were distributed among several qualified staff members. Tyler often jokes now about his initial plan to modernize the company by firing anyone over 40 and replacing institutional knowledge with digital solutions. He understands now that modernization means building on existing strengths while carefully integrating new capabilities, not discarding valuable assets in favor of untested alternatives. The coffee machine in the break room became something of a running joke between us. Tyler never did learn how to use it properly, but he stopped being embarrassed about asking for help with things he didn't understand. That simple change in attitude from assuming he should know everything to accepting that he could learn from others made him a much more effective leader. As I write this, Morrison Industries continues to thrive under our collaborative leadership model. Tyler handles strategic planning and business development. I manage operations and regulatory compliance, and Brandon oversees day-to-day operations with increasing independence and authority. The company has grown from 50 employees to nearly 100, with offices in 3 states and contracts with multiple federal agencies. We've maintained our reputation for quality and reliability while expanding into new market segments and developing innovative solutions for our clients' evolving needs. Most importantly, we've created a sustainable business model that doesn't depend on any single individual. The institutional knowledge that was once concentrated in my experience has been documented, systematized, and shared among multiple team members. The personal relationships that were once my exclusive domain have been expanded to include Tyler, Brandon, and other senior staff members. The succession planning process that began as a crisis management exercise has evolved into a comprehensive leadership development program that prepares multiple employees for advancement opportunities. We've created a culture where experience is valued and expertise is shared, where innovation is encouraged within appropriate constraints, and where respect is earned through contribution rather than demanded through position. The partnership that began as a legal technicality has become a genuine collaboration that strengthens Morrison Industries beyond what any of us could have achieved alone. Tyler's strategic vision, my operational expertise, and Brandon's process innovation combine to create capabilities that none of us possess individually. And that perhaps is the most important lesson of all, that the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong, but helping them become right. Tyler's attempt to diminish my contributions ultimately led to a structure where all of our contributions were enhanced and amplified. The young CEO, who once thought experience was obsolete, learned that wisdom comes from combining fresh thinking with proven expertise. The veteran operations manager, who had been content to work in the background, learned that leadership sometimes requires stepping forward and asserting your value. And the ambitious MBA student learned that academic knowledge becomes powerful only when it's grounded in practical understanding and respect for existing strengths. Morrison Industries today is stronger than it was when Richard Morrison was alive because we've learned to combine the founder's entrepreneurial vision with systematic processes and collaborative leadership. We honor the past while building for the future, and we measure success not just in financial terms, but in the satisfaction of our employees, the loyalty of our clients, and the sustainability of our growth. Sometimes the best stories are the ones where everyone gets a chance to be the hero. The epilogue to this story continues to unfold even today. Last month, Brandon was promoted to Vice President of Operations, a position that didn't exist when Tyler first tried to fire me, but now represents a crucial role in our organizational structure. His promotion was earned through 5 years of demonstrated competence, continuous learning, and genuine respect for the expertise of his colleagues. Tyler recently completed a master's certificate program in government contracting from Georgetown University, acknowledging that his business education needed to be supplemented with industry-specific knowledge. He approaches new challenges now with curiosity rather than arrogance, asking questions instead of assuming he has all the answers. And me? I'm still here, still learning, still contributing. At 60, I have no plans to retire, because Morrison Industries has become more than just a job. It's a legacy we're all building together. The partnership that began as a legal necessity has evolved into something none of us could have imagined, a truly collaborative enterprise where everyone's contributions are valued and enhanced. The blue folder that started this whole confrontation still sits in my office, but now it's displayed openly on my bookshelf rather than hidden in a filing cabinet. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for your own value, even when others can't see it yet. Every day, I'm grateful for Tyler's attempt to fire me because it forced all of us to grow in ways we never would have otherwise. The crisis became a catalyst, the confrontation became a collaboration, and what started as revenge became redemption for all of us. That's the thing about true justice. It doesn't destroy people, it transforms them. And sometimes the best revenge is helping everyone become the best version of themselves. When people ask me about this experience, they often expect me to say that Tyler got what he deserved, or that I'm proud of putting him in his place. But the truth is more complicated than that. What Tyler deserved was the chance to learn and grow, and what I needed was the opportunity to be recognized for my contributions. The confrontation gave both of us what we actually needed, even if it wasn't what we initially wanted. The real victory wasn't in proving Tyler wrong. It was in creating a situation where we could all be right, where his vision for growth and innovation could coexist with my commitment to stability and compliance, where Brandon's fresh perspectives could complement rather than replace institutional knowledge, where respect became mutual rather than demanded or withheld. Morrison Industries today stands as proof that age and experience don't have to be obstacles to innovation, and that innovation doesn't have to come at the expense of wisdom. We've learned that the best solutions often come from bringing different perspectives together, not from replacing one with another. And perhaps most importantly, we've learned that true leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about being curious enough to ask the right questions, humble enough to learn from others, and wise enough to know that sustainable success comes from building people up rather than tearing them down. That's the lesson that's worth 61,000 words and countless hours of reflection. Sometimes the most profound change comes not from destruction, but from the patient work of transformation. And sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's limitations define your own potential. The story continues, because the best stories always do.